Rito Kuren. A distress call was placed to the Burlington, Vermont Police Department early on July 20th, 1971. The sad murder of Rita Curran, her roommate, was reported by a worried woman. She found her dead body in a pool of her own blood on their shared bed when she got home from work. The horrific scene showed that Rita had been the victim of a vicious attack involving physical assault, sexual assault, and strangulation by an intruder who had broken into their apartment. Rita had clearly engaged in ferocious combat with her attacker. Despite a thorough investigation and a number of leads, Rita's killer's identity remained a perplexing enigma for many years for both her family and the Burlington Police Department. That being said, the offender was eventually discovered after 52 long years. Born in Brooklyn, Kings County, New York, on June 21st, 1947, Rita Curran was the cherished daughter of Thomas and Mary Curran. Rita was regarded as a kind, giving, and attractive person who was also known for her sensitive demeanor and dislike of hurting other people. She decided to move out of her parents' house for the first time at the age of 24 in the summer of 1971. She would share an apartment on Brooks Avenue in Burlington, Vermont with 3 other roommates, none of whom she had gotten along well with. In addition to teaching second grade at Milton Elementary School, Rita was a graduate student at the University of Vermont. She was hired as a maid at a nearby motel for the summer. Tragically, Rita was viciously murdered inside her Burlington apartment 2 weeks after leaving her family's home. She was found with curlers in her hair, indicating, according to the police report, that she was getting ready for bed when she was attacked. The normally friendly and tranquil city of Burlington was rocked by the horrifying murder of Rita Curran. At the time, a lot of people lived with their front doors open, and this horrible crime destroyed the community's sense of security. Given that the police investigation found no evidence of force being used to the entrance door, it is plausible that Rita Curran's apartment door was unlocked at the time of her death. As part of their investigation, the police gathered evidence from the crime scene, including a solitary cigarette that appeared to have been left for burnout by the murderer next to Rita Curran's arm. Along with interviewing Rita Curran's neighbors, the police also investigated hundreds of tips. Williams and Michelle DeRouse, a recently married couple who lived 2 floors above Rita Curran at the time of her murder, were among the neighbors who were questioned. They told the detectives that despite spending the entire night together, they had not heard or seen anything unusual. Ted Bundy was one of the 13 suspects on the police's list. It was found that Ted Bundy's birthplace, the Elizabeth Lund home for unmarried lovers, was not far from the neighborhood motel where Rita Curran lived. Rita Curran's murder and the crime scene were so close to Ted Bundy's methods that retired FBI agent John Bassett suggested that Curran be the culprit. Rita Curran's sister Mary Campbell Curran submitted a letter to Ted Bundy's prisoner on Floral's death row, hoping to get some answers and establish if Bundy was actually the one who killed her. In response, the FBI told her that there was no hard proof that Ted Bundy was in Burlington on the day of the murder and that he had refused to admit or deny his role in Curran's killing. But when Ted Bundy was examined by investigator Robert B. Capel, he eventually confessed to him that he had killed a young woman in Burlington in 1971 while he was there obtaining information regarding his birth. Nonetheless, Ted Bundy denied having anything to do with Rita Curran's case to FBI Special Agent William Hackneer on January 22, 1989, the eve of his execution. After pursuing every possible lead and not being able to identify a suspect through sophisticated DNA testing, the case went unresolved for more than 40 years. Acting Burlington Police Chief John Neerad says the department has always worked to bring Rita Curran's family's case to justice. All of the murder scene's evidence, including the cigarette, was transferred by the Burlington Police Department to a forensic lab in New York City in 2014 so that DNA could be collected. Despite the fact that the test produced a DNA profile from the cigarette, it did not match any DNA in the national databases kept by law enforcement. This implied that the person whose DNA was found on the cigarette had probably never had it added to the database, maybe as a result of not having been convicted of any felonies. Moreover, None of the 13 primary suspects that the police had identified had any DNA that the DNA testing had found a match. But in 2019, Detective Lieutenant James Trebb made the decision to handle the investigation in a different way. Rather than following the departmental protocol and designating a single detective to concentrate on the case, Lieutenant Trebb brought together a fresh group of knowledgeable technicians to examine and deliberate over the Rita Kern case. This group approached the matter as though it had just happened. They then started re-examining the evidence, which included mailing the cigarette for additional DNA testing. This time, they used genetic genealogy, which is a method of conducting genealogical research using DNA databases to find prospective relatives of the person whose DNA does not match any current profiles. The genetic genealogy specialist discovered, after the DNA research, that there were close ties between the cigarette's DNA and the family of William Darius, who lived 2 floors above Rita Kern's flat in 1971. Detectives had questioned William Darius and his spouse, and William claimed to have been at home when the murder occurred. The detectives then tracked down William Daru's live half-brother, who voluntarily gave a sample of his DNA. It was ultimately established following the test that William Darius was the owner of the DNA found on the cigarette. A Florida crime lab received more evidence from the crime scene in 2022, including Rita Kern's torn house coat. To further examine the evidence, they used novel DNA extraction methods in this lab. The genetic data from the cigarette had previously been forwarded to a genealogy company by the investigators. Their goal was to investigate a more extensive DNA database that would help identify the murderer. It's amazing how quickly the scientists and genealogical specialists were able to link William Darius's DNA to the cigarette. A great deal of investigation into public and genealogical records led to this discovery. Moreover, the DNA on the cigarette butt and the ripped housecoat belonging to Rita Kern matched. Then the detectives came upon a shocking finding. They discovered that William Darius had overdosed on drugs at a San Francisco hotel in 1986, leaving him dead at the age of 46. He and his wife had left Vermont soon after Rita Kern's murder, and they finally got divorced. Michelle, the ex-wife of William Daru, admitted lying to the police in 1971 over her husband's whereabouts the night of the incident. Michelle, who had moved to Eugene, Oregon, and assumed a new name, revealed that on July 19, 1971, she had argued with William Daru. He had gone for a walk, trying to cool off. Later that evening, he came back and told Michelle to tell the detectives that he had never left their apartment. He cautioned her that he might unjustly be considered a suspect in Rita Kern's killing due to his prior criminal history. Michelle was interviewed by Detective Thomas Chenet, who voiced doubts about her knowing that William Darius was the murderer. Given their recent marriage, their obvious love for one another, and his criminal past, he felt that she was shielding him. William Darius moved to Thailand and became a monk after they got divorced. But in 1974, he went back to San Francisco, California, where he eventually met Sarah Hepting, his second wife. Sarah Hepting revealed that William Darius was prone to violent outbursts during an interview with the Burlington police. She said that he had acted violently against her on 2 separate occasions. One such incident happened when they were talking to a female acquaintance. Out of the blue, he reached for a pocket knife and stabbed the woman in the abdomen for no apparent reason. Despite his arrest, the woman decided not to file a complaint. Darius later admitted to Hepting that he had thought he had stabbed her by mistake. Hepting stated that the second instance of Darius's aggression happened over dinner, when he started strangling her out of the blue. Hepting finally had enough and left him because of this. Rita Kern's parents were tragically killed after her case was settled, and they never found out who had killed their daughter. Nonetheless, her surviving relatives and friends remained in memory of her and took comfort in the resolution the case brought. Rita Kern was a lovely and caring individual, according to Jim Rivard, a former second-grade pupil. He recalled a play they had done together in which he had been a dancing clown clutching a teddy bear. He still treasures the teddy bear Rita gave him, even if he can't seem to find it now. Rita's sister, Mary Curran Campbell, lamented that 2 generations of their family had grown up without ever meeting her. Rita's brother, Tom Curran, chose not to dwell on the offender and instead concentrated more on the hardships that their parents and Rita went through. He complimented Rita and his parents on their tranquility. Lieutenant Trebb asserted with confidence that William DeRouse was the person responsible for Rita Curran's heinous murder as he concluded the case. However, he won't be held responsible for his acts because he passed away from a heroin overdose in a hotel room. However, the matter will be formally closed. Moving on to the next case. Raina Reason. A date with Matt Elser after work was something Raina Reason was looking forward to, considering she had recently broken up with him. Their goal was to reconcile and try to get back together as a couple. Sadly, the date never came to pass because Raina Reason was last seen alive at approximately 6 p.m. on March 26, 1993, when her automobile arrived. Before answers were finally given 21 years later, Raina Reason's family and the police were plagued by the question of what happened to her for decades. The murder case of today takes us to LaPorte, Indiana, the county seat of LaPorte County, in a little town located roughly 70 miles southeast of Chicago. LaPorte, which translates to the door in French, is a typical tiny Midwestern town with lots of pubs and cafes, trees, and independent stores. Although it isn't thought of as a location where terrible crimes were likely to happen, in 1993, there was a crime that rocked the entire neighborhood. Ben and Karen Reason welcomed Raina into the world on May 6, 1976, in LaPorte County, Indiana. Raina Reason, a sophomore at LaPorte High School, was a typical student in the spring of 1993. She had participated in the school band and played various instruments. Her academic records show that she consistently received good grades. She worked 3 jobs and was an honor student. Raina Reason was really determined to be a veterinarian. She even took a job at an animal hospital since she loves animals. The 16-year-old appeared to have everything under control. Raina Reason left her home at roughly 4 o'clock on Friday, March 26, 1993, looking like she was going about her usual workday at Pine Lake Animal Hospital. She'd recently broken up with her long-term boyfriend, Matt Elser, and had planned a date with him after work. They believed that the date would help them in their plans to reconcile. When Matt Elser, a sophomore at LaPorte High School, went to Raina Reason's place of employment to pick her up at the end of the day, he was shocked to discover that she was nowhere to be found. Instead, with the doors closed and the lights off, the animal hospital appeared abandoned. He made a few passes past the hospital, but he was still unable to locate her or her vehicle. Matt Elser drove to her house, supposing she had come by to pick up a few things. When Ben, Raina's father, arrived to her residence, he was informed that Raina had not come home from work either. They made the decision to wait for her return, but when she still hadn't returned home at 10:30 at night, they felt something wasn't right and began to fear the worst. Wendy, Raina's younger sister, and her parents made the decision to go to the station and report her missing. They were instructed to hold off on filing a missing person report for 24 hours after they arrived. Ben made an effort to reason with the police, pointing out that although Raina's prolonged absence from home was unusual, there was nothing the police could do until the 24-hour period had passed. The next day, an investigation was started to find her. Raina Reason's family called her acquaintances, including her older sister Lori, to see if anyone had seen her, but no one seemed to know where Raina Reason had disappeared. The Reason family distributed leaflets across the neighborhood, and the police issued a general call for information leading to Raina's location. Witnesses who claimed to have seen Raina Reason outside the veterinary hospital conversing with 2 men in a vehicle provided a lead. They claimed she seemed like she was fighting and squabbling with one of them. It appeared to the witnesses to be a couple's quarrel. With their recent breakup, the police surmised that Matt Elser was probably one of those men. After questioning him, they learned that he had no involvement in Raina Reason's disappearance. Furthermore, Raina's parents thought Matt Elsa had nothing to do with her abduction, even though they had approved of their daughter's connection with her. Raina Reason's car was discovered with the hood up on County Road 200 East the following evening. After a relentless search that had taken place barely 9 miles from the animal hospital where she worked. The car appeared to have broken down on the side of the road at first, but it was subsequently found that the keys were in the ignition and the vehicle started without any issues. Investigators thought the vehicle had been set up to appear to be in a breakdown. They found a man's ring and Raina Reason's pocketbook when they searched the vehicle. The investigators wanted to know who owned the ring because they believed it could hold answers. Then someone asked Matt Elser about the ring. He claimed that although it wasn't his, it belonged to Raina Reason's ex-boyfriend, Jason Tibbs. While in the 7th grade, Jason Tibbs and Raina Reason dated for 6 months. Raina began dating Matt Elser shortly after their breakup. When Jason Tibbs was questioned by the police, he acknowledged that the ring was his. He claimed to have been working on Raina's car when he took off the ring, put it inside, and then forgotten about it when questioned how it got inside. They went on to question him about his activities on the night that Raina Reason vanished. He said that he was going fox hunting with a few of his mates. A car-based version of hide and seek is called fox hunting. The seeker had to locate the people who were hiding by using the CB radio to get hints about their whereabouts. When police questioned with his pals, they acknowledged that they were participating in the game, but none of them really acknowledged seeing Jason Tibbs. Even though it wasn't solid enough, Jason Tibbs' alibi at the time was sufficient to exonerate him. Raina Reason was still being sought after. Weeks grew into months as days continued to pass. Ultimately, on April 26, 1993, a month after her abduction, a father was fishing in a rural pond with his teenage daughter, north of US 20 in LaPorte County, immediately off Range Road. They found a dead person that was completely clothed and had 2 logs across its back. When the police arrived, they saw that the deceased person was dressed in clothing that matched Raina's when she vanished, which is why the man had phoned the police right away. Later on, it was established that the body belonged to Raina Reason. The medical examiner concluded that Raina Reason died from asphyxiation, which is the result of being choked and oxygen deprived, while the coroner declared Reason's death to be a homicide. The police had suspected a few people before her remains were found who might have been involved in her disappearance. Among the handful of suspects was Ray McCarty. He had been a suspect in the early stages of the investigation and was married to Raina's elder sister, Lori, but he had maintained he had never seen her. The authorities had released him since there wasn't enough evidence. But soon after she was located, the investigator received a tip stating that Ray McCarty needed to be thoroughly questioned since he had previously been found guilty of child molestation for repeatedly raping Raina Reason when she was 11 years old and getting her pregnant when she was 14 years old. In 1991, Ray McCarty was given a 3-year suspended sentence, and Raina Reason underwent an abortion. His probation expired on January 5, 1993, a mere 2 months prior to Raina's abduction and subsequent death. Given that he was likely upset with Raina for coming clean about what he had done to her, the police reasoned that he might have actually been involved in her death. Another witness had come forward, claiming to have seen Ray McCarthy at Raina Reason's workplace, the animal hospital. Ray McCarty was brought in by the police for more questioning after this, and on this occasion, he acknowledged having seen Raina the night before she vanished. He told the police that he was searching for a house on Warren Street, which is right next to the animal hospital, to buy at approximately 5:40 p.m. on March 26, 1993. Ray McCarty reported that from his house, he could see Raina's automobile parked in a lot in the animal hospital. He then proceeded to the veterinary facility, where he discovered someone mopping or sweeping the foyer. She said that she didn't know where Lori was when he asked, and he walked away. He said to the police that he had picked up a female hitchhiker that evening and didn't want Lori to find out when they questioned him about why he had first lied about seeing Raina. He claimed that despite his sexual abuse of Lori's sister, she was still untrustworthy of him. Although Ray McCarty was thought to be a person of interest in the case, there was no proof that he was involved in the crime, and the investigation stalled for some time in the absence of any evidence. 1.5 years later, Larry Hall's van was stopped by Indiana police. His attempted kidnapping led to his arrest. In his van, The cops found media cuttings featuring Raina and a prescription bottle bearing the name or Reason. Larry Hall said he had slain Raina Reason and abducted her after being apprehended. But after looking over his allegation, the police found the prescription bottle was phony and that he was in Kentucky when Raina Reason vanished. Larry Hall was subsequently given a life sentence for a different murder, even though he was cleared out as a suspect in this case. The detectives tasked with solving the Raina Reason's case made the decision to re-examine the males in Raina's life in 1990. The authorities thought Matt Elser did not murder Raina since his story remained unchanged. Investigators examined Jason Tibbs' fox hunting alibi. They came to the conclusion that it was insufficiently solid because the players were in their own cars and did not acknowledge seeing Tibbs. In the process, they obtained a search warrant to examine Ray McCarty's property and looked at his profile. Subsequently, investigators discovered 2 handguns, a stun gun, and blood in his car. In May 1998, Ray McCarty was immediately taken into custody and charged with murder. However, during Ray's incarceration, Fort County elected Robert Beckman as their new prosecutor, who determined that there was insufficient evidence to pursue Ray McCarty's case to trial. It never occurred to investigators to find out where the blood in his automobile came from. Given that Ray McCarty was rumored to be a hunter, it's plausible that the blood in his car belonged to an animal. In August 1999, Ray McCarty's allegations were withdrawn, and the matter once more became cold. 9 years later, in March 2008, the case was revived after 14-year-old Ricky Hammonds contacted the police claiming to have information related to Raina Reason's disappearance and death. Police were informed by Ricky Hammonds, a murderer serving a jail sentence, that he had seen Jason Tibbs and another man by the name of Eric Freeman drag his sister's car into the family bullpen. It was rumored that Eric Freeman had moved in with them to be with Ricky Hammonds' sister, with whom he was at the time dating. Ricky had discovered a body inside the trunk, its face uncovered and covered with a blanket, when Jason Tibbs and Eric Freeman had opened it. He said at the time that he was unaware Raina was the cause until he saw the news reports about her death and disappearance. Ricky Hammonds informed the police that he had been smoking marijuana in the barn at the time and did not want to get into trouble, which is why he had never come forward before. Then, after calling Eric Freeman at his South Carolina home, detectives questioned him regarding the killing of Raina Reason. Eric Freeman evaded all questions because he wanted to avoid being implicated as an accomplice. But in 2013, the police gave him another call. This time, he testified because the police promised to protect him from prosecution if he was honest and cooperative in the investigation into Raina Reason's murder. Then, as Raina was leaving work, he told the police he and Jason Tibbs had driven to the animal hospital at around 6 o'clock. Jason Tibbs and Raina Reason then got into a car that was being driven by Eric Freeman. Raina was persuaded not to reconcile with Matt Elser by Tibbs, who was aware of the problems in their relationship. The prospect of dating Jason Tibbs once more did not sit well with Raina. Raina and Jason Tibbs stepped out of the car when it pulled over on the side of the road, and they got into a fight that ended with Jason hitting Raina and sending her to the ground. He then fatally choked her. Then, Jason Tibbs and Eric Freeman placed her body inside the car's trunk. Later, they pulled the car into the Hammonds family's pole barn without realizing that Ricky Hammonds was hiding there and had witnessed all of the events. When angry and terrified Eric Freeman confronted Jason Tibbs at the pole barn, asking him why he had killed Raina, Tibbs replied, "If I can't have her, nobody can." Then, at the pond on Range Road where Raina was discovered, Eric Freeman assisted Jason Tibbs in disposing of her body. Jason Tibbs was taken into custody by the authorities in August 2013 and accused of killing Raina Reason. On August 23, 2013, a Friday, he was entered into custody. Since his ring was discovered in Raina Reason's car early in the inquiry, Jason Tibbs has been a person of interest, according to court filings. Additionally, notes from Jason to Raina that were taken from her bedroom stated that he would do practically everything to win her back as a boyfriend. Two love letters sent by Jason Tibbs to Rana Reason in the 7th grade were also read aloud by the professional sector. In both letters, he declared his love for her and conveyed his sadness that they were apart. A letter said, "It kind of bothers me that you're only with one person. I feel envious of Matt." The trial of Jason Tibbs lasted from October 2014 to November of the same year. Throughout the trial, the defense attempted to undermine the testimony of Eric Freeman and Ricky Hammonds. Because Ray McCarty had previously vowed to kill Raina Racing if she revealed their sexual relationship, they concentrated their attention on Ray McCarty as Raina Racing's killer. The jurors, however, did not buy into the defense's theory. After being found guilty of murder, Jason Tibbs was given a 40-year jail sentence in December 2014. His lawyer, Scott King, attempted to overturn the murder conviction a year later, but the Indiana Supreme Court rejected his case. Ben Reason, Raina's father, stated in an interview after his arrest that murdering someone does not mean that you are murdering that person. You kill off an entire family. Even though Raina's murderer has been apprehended, her family does not yet appear to have found closure in her passing. Ben Reason put it this way: you take it day by day, and you learn to live with it. As you can't move past it, you have to learn to live with it. He also stated that he hoped to find some sort of tranquility. Moving on to the next case. Dr. Sneha and Philip. Kerala, India was home to the brilliant and fiercely independent young Dr. Sneha and Philip. Her disturbing disappearance in September 2001, in the hours before the 9/11 terrorist attacks, cut short her unwavering care for her patients, her curiosity in various arts, and her desire to see the world. Everyone who knew her in the Manhattan community and throughout New York City at large was left searching for answers in a sea of mysteries that left us all feeling lost in doubt. This analysis looks at Sneha and Philip's disappearance in the years leading up to one of the worst days in American history and the decades-long struggle her family waged to clear her name and ultimately preserve her heroic legacy. The goal is to present more compelling arguments based on factual data and situational analysis. On October 7, 1969, Sneha and Philip were born to doctors. Kerala, an Indian state located directly on the Malabar coast, is home to Kokiel and Ansu Philip. Sneha became a part of a trio. Her brother Ashvins was born before her. She was first introduced to the Philip family not long before her parents welcomed their second son. This individual goes by Kevin. Even as a small child, the only girl got along well with both of her brothers, creating a playful connection that frequently involved lengthy days full of excitement and laughing. However, the Phillips family determined after a few years that their stay in Kerala, India was coming to an end, believing that moving to the US would be the ideal option for both Dr. The Phillipses, a bright and growing family, relocated to upstate New York due to Kokiel's logic and career. After arriving, Sneha and the others made their home in Hopewell Junction. Before we continue, we want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch our videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy our content, consider subscribing. It's free. Now, let's move on with the video. A Dutchess County hamlet and census-designated place near Poughkeepsie, New York. When Sneha finally arrived in America, she adjusted to the many cultures and lifestyles around her rather well. She developed a particular fondness for the beautiful arts in particular, and she was particularly drawn to writing, painting, and music. Sneha had a wide range of interests. Her artistic endeavors were just one aspect of them. Throughout her latter childhood, a number of her classmates and teachers noted how she combined a deep-seated empathy for others with an astonishing level of intelligence for her age. Sneha's altruistic tendencies persisted throughout high school, when she made the decision to study medicine and eventually earn a doctorate. Naturally, there was some hesitation in doing this. Sneha continued to have a strong connection to the arts and thought about defying convention by choosing to major in painting or a related field in college rather than official medicine. Ultimately, though, the arguments were won by the certain promise of a medical profession. Inspired by her father's medical career, Sneha enrolled in the Chicago School of Medicine in 1995, following her graduation from Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland. Sneha met Ron Lieberman, a Los Angeles transplant student studying 1 year behind her, while she was a fellow doctor-in-waiting at Rosalind Franklin University of Medicine and Science, also known as RFS. Not just on a personal level, the two fell in love right away. Sneha discovered after a few chats that Ron was a fellow artist who performed in his spare time and loved music in general. Sneha, who also enjoys painting, saw that the two could combine their personal and professional lives, and they began dating. Sneha even took a year off from school during Ron's penultimate year at RFS in order to travel across the Italian countryside and graduate and enter the post-graduation stage simultaneously. Following their graduation from RFS, the couple relocated to Lower Manhattan's East Village district in New York City, where they both secured nearby internships. While Sneha was employed at the Cabrini Medical Center, Ron discovered a chance at the Bronx's Jacobi Medical Center. In May 2000, Ron and Sneha tied the knot in a private ceremony in the Dutchess County home of the Phillips siblings. The event turned out to be really special, as both families included elements of their Indian, Christian, and Jewish heritages. In fact, Ron gave Sneha a minu, a customary bridal jewelry given to brides in Malayali Christian traditions, at the wedding. This one had a diamond placed in the shape of a golden teardrop. That would be the same necklace that her parents had been frantically searching for in September of 2001. Their only daughter, who had once seemed full of promise, vanished without a trace when the World Trade Center Twin Towers were terrorized. Now let's look at the sequence of events that led up to Sneha becoming missing. Sneha and Ron, who had recently tied the knot, moved into a larger apartment in Battery Park City during the summer of 2000, just a few blocks from the World Trade Center. In the spring of 2001, almost a year later, Sneha receives word from her director of residence that her contracts will not be extended. After just a few months, she was hired by Staten Island ST. That summer of 2000, Sneha was suspended from Vincent Medical Center for not attending her scheduled meetings with her drug abuse counselor following her treatment for alcoholism. Before the attacks on Friday, her mother went to see Sneha. They spent time together, had dinner, and watched a movie. Sneha spent the nights there, and the day before she left, she mentioned that she wished she still had a closer relationship with her mother. On September 10th, Sneha appeared in court early in the morning and entered a not guilty plea to the allegation of making a false complaint. At 11 in the morning, Ron leaves their apartment on Rector Place for work, leaving Sneha alone. Sneha spends the remainder of the morning tidying things before her cousin Anu arrives on Wednesday, September 12th. Sneha repots white-purple orchids from Hawaii in the early afternoon and dries them in the bathtub. She texts her mother between 2 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, chatting about Ron's guitar performance at a recent event at Jacobi Medical Center and her wish to see windows on the global restaurants on the rooftop of North WTC Tower, where a friend was being married in the spring of 2002. Sneha then changes into sandals, a brown short-sleeve dress, and ties her hair back into a ponytail between 4 and 5 p.m. Shortly after the clock chimes 5 times, she leaves. Sneha leaves her dry cleaning between 5 and 6 o'clock in the evening and goes to Century 21 to shop at a bargain mall. It's a short distance from the residences, just a few blocks past the Twin Towers. She visits the department store to get underwear, a fresh outfit, pantyhose, and clean sheets for the apartments. There's a transaction at that same Century 21 just after 6 p.m. using Ron's American Express credit card, which Sneha was allowed to use. She strolls to the store next door between 6 and 7 p.m. and purchases 3 pairs of shoes from the shoe annex. During the 2-hour shopping spree, Sneha is captured on CCTV inspecting the department store's apparel. This would be Sneha and Philip's final verified sighting. Ron gets home from work just before midnight later that evening. In addition to Sneha's absence, he observes that she has not left any voicemails, something she did not want her to do late one night. Ron checked on Figa and Carly, the 2 house cats, and made ssure they were okay before turning in for the night on September 11, 2001. Ron receives a missed call on his cell phone from a phone line within the apartment at 4 in the morning the next day. The only other person with access to the house is Sneha, but Ron claims he hardly remembers checking his voicemail at that time and doesn't recall ever receiving a call. 2.5 hours later, Ron awakens on his own to his 6:30 alarm once more. He is first irritated, but then learns that Sneha most likely just spent the night at her brother's or relative's house in West Village, which is a common occurrence. He hurriedly gets ready and takes the Uptown 5 train to Jacoby Medical Center to pick up the parts. Ron shows up for the 8 a.m. meeting, blissfully unaware of the impending disaster, just like all the other blissfully uninformed New Yorkers in the city. American Airlines Flight 11, a Boeing 767 carrying 92 people, crashes between floors 93 and 99 on the north face of the North Tower, also known as 1WC, at the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan, New York City, 46 minutes later at 40 seconds past 8:46 a.m. After a short while, Ron departs from a conference at Jacoby Medical Center. When he comes out of the room, his colleagues are crammed around a TV. A news report about a jet crash into the World Trade Center, which is only a few blocks from his flat, is shown to him as he gets closer. Immediately, thoughts of snare cross his head. Everyone initially thinks the jet crash is an accident, but that quickly changes when United Airlines Flight 77, a Boeing 767 carrying 65 people, hits between floors 7,785 on the south face of the South Tower, often known as 2WTC, at 9:03 in the morning. Ron calls his Battery Park apartment urgently about the same time, hoping to get through to Sneha, but no one answers. In case Sneha needs to get in touch with him when she gets home, he leaves his phone number on the voicemail. Ron then gets in touch with Sneha's mother and brother, who haven't heard from his wife either, following that fruitless attempt. In the meantime, the horrific September 11th events are still happening all around the country. In a span of 30 minutes, the World Trade Center's South Tower collapses at 9:59, Flight 93 crashes in Somerset County, Pennsylvania at 10:03, and the North Tower collapses at 10:28. American Airlines Flight 77 crashes into the west side of the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. at 9:37 a.m. United Airlines Flight 93 is seized by its passengers from the hijackers, who are ostensibly headed to the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. at 9:57 a.m. Ron stays by himself and muses over all the possible endings for Sneha while the chaos raging through Manhattan and other places decimates the entire country. His possibilities include becoming a victim of the World Trade Center attacks herself, being abducted, and being murdered. Ron decides around 3 p.m. to leave work and search for his wife after hours of tense waiting. Ron is compelled to hitch a ride with an ambulance that is traveling toward Ground Zero on 9/11 because of the severe traffic that occurs throughout the day in the New York City metro area. The squads had to maneuver across opposing traffic, making the hike take up to 6 hours, and Sneha was nowhere to be seen. Ron gets to Tribeca at 9 o'clock at night to see that the World Trade Center crash site has been blocked off by the NYPD. He can go through with his medical credentials and dash to his residences. Sadly, the front doors are locked owing to the local power outage, so Ron is forced to seek refuge at his friend's West Village apartments. On September 12th, the next morning, Ron gets up and returns to Battery Park, where he may at last enter the apartment complex. He goes upstairs, enters his apartment, and discovers that a bedroom window has been left open, and the entire apartment is covered in soot from the fall of the tower. Ron searches the floor for human tracks as he suddenly thinks he can take use of the soot. Unfortunately, all he discovers are the couple's 2 kitten-strewn paw tracks, indicating that Sneha was unable to return after the World Trade Center collapsed. Ron chooses to submit a missing persons complaint with the NYPD, one of the over 9,000 missing persons reports that were made in the immediate wake of 9/11, after conducting additional checks with Sneha's acquaintances and relatives. Over the next few days, Ron decided to go looking for his wife. When he contacted American Express to report the loss of his credit card, they informed him that the last transaction had occurred on September 10th at the Century 21 department store. Ron then made his way to that very store, where he hangs flyers for Sneha about missing people in and around the aisles. Ron gets a call later that week from a former worker at the Century 21 store, who tells him she saw Sneha on the evening of the 10th. Ron is also informed by the employee that Sneha was with someone else in the store that day, and she thought the other person was another Indian woman. Ron returns with this information to Century 21, where he is given access to 3 weeks' worth of security camera footage. At this point, he discovers the CCTV image of his spouse shopping for clothing. But in every clip when she appears, she is by alone. Ron recruited private investigator Ken Gallant after waiting for the NYPD to start their investigation and being angry with their uncaring attitude about her 911 fates. At first, the investigator thought it was possible that Sneha had used the assaults on the World Trade Center as a pretext to flee her personal problems and begin anew in an unidentified location. This notion, however, is short-lived as Gallant and Ron concur that Sneha most likely returned to the apartments on September 11th, witnessed the assaults in real time, and made the decision to head to Ground Zero and use her medical experience to help the injured right away. Although her remains were never found, this is most likely the place where she passed away. When enough proof is gathered, Ron brings this to the attention of the police. He discovers that the NYPD is conducting a separate investigation into her disappearance because of her unpredictable behavior and criminal past, leading them to believe that she was the victim of foul play rather than a 911 call. In 2003, Lieberman objects to the NYPD's conclusion of his wife's investigation and maintains that she should continue to be recognized as a victim of the 911 incident. He also requests access to the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund in exchange for his efforts to find his wife and try to bring her home. The NYPD submits these results to the courts hearing Ron's claim. However, they finally determine that there is insufficient evidence to establish Sneha was a victim of the World Trade Center attacks, and in January 2004, her name and the names of 2 other individuals are struck from the official list of deceased. Disbelieving, Ron and the Phillip family fight valiantly to challenge this decision, claiming that the police falsified their conclusions by using circumstantial evidence and family testimony. While Sneha's disappearance was not a direct result of the 911 terrorist attacks, the defense contended at the appeal hearing in the late winter of 2008 that it was highly likely given that her route home that morning would have taken her directly past Ground Zero at the moment when the Twin Towers were first hit. As a result, there was more conjecture because Sneha was in the area and her status as an official victim of the worst day in contemporary American history was reinstated. Notwithstanding the decision, Sneha and Phillips's tale has been one of doubt rather than possible bravery, blaming her early adult troubles on her status as missing and alleging that Ron Lieberman and her relatives took use of her disappearance for personal financial benefit. Naturally, the majority of the 9,000 missing person reports that passed through law enforcement in the days and weeks following the 9/11 attacks included the regrettable disclaimer that the majority, if not all, would discover evidence and clues lost in the cracks. It was just too chaotic and hysterical to conduct appropriate investigations. Not to mention the fact that a large number of these allegations are either duplicates or cases where the victim was discovered by the police or the victim's family to be one of the assault's own victims. If there's any silver lining, it's that a large portion of New York City has copious amounts of CCTV and security cameras in every nook and cranny throughout the metro. The problem with this scenario, of course, is that a lot of security cameras were either turned off or left unattended on the morning of September 11th and in the days that followed. In an attempt to unravel the 9/11 conspiracy, local, state, and federal authorities in New York City made every effort to confiscate as much video as they could. They had no idea, however, that despite their delays, these preservation efforts ultimately benefited the smaller studies just as much. This is the exact circumstance that affected Sneha and Phillip's search and offered the crucial hint for determining what might have happened to her on September 10th evening or on September 11th. Upon conducting an investigation into Sneha's disappearance, private investigator Ken Gallant discovered surveillance footage from the main lobby of the Rector Place apartments in Battery Park, where the couple had lived for approximately a year. The recordings demonstrated that at 8:43 a.m. on Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, a woman entered the lobby of Rector Place, made her way to the elevator, stood for a brief while, and then left. Sadly, these cassettes are not available to us. Nonetheless, they were included in the official case files of Ken Gallant and submitted to the courts during the judge-led argument of Sneha's case. According to the documents, the angle of the sun's rays coming through the lobby window starkly contrasted with the quality of the CCTV picture. Yet the woman's fundamental features could still be seen. According to Ron's testimony, the person in the picture had his wife's mannerisms, had a ponytail or hairdo that was comparable to Sneha's at the time, and even had clothing that looked like Sneha's from the earlier Century 21 security clip. There are other indications that the woman might be Sneha. Another important hint is the time of day. Ron stated in court that Sneha would usually be home between 7:09 a.m. and 8 a.m. the next day if she didn't come home after a night out, which wasn't too often. The timestamp, which is around 8:43 a.m., follows the pattern exactly. Despite having only seen the woman's case file and never having met her in person, an NYPD investigator who also gave testimony during the court proceedings even went so far as to declare he thought the woman was Sneha Phillip. The main refutation of the assertion is that Sneha would have been clutching bags or other goods after returning to the flat for the first time since her shopping excursion, which the woman in the security tape isn't seen carrying. But this could be the reason the woman exited the foyer at Rector Place after spending a minute or two there. If Sneha was the person, perhaps she realized she had left her Century 21 luggage at home or at the train and hurried out to get them when she got there. Some believe that Sneha's departure from the lobby was actually her response to hearing the first plane crash into the World Trade Center's North Tower, even though it was only a few blocks away, and that the timing on the CCTV system was inaccurate by a minute or two. Clocks and CCTV systems are often programmed with the most precise timestamp available. It is impossible to prove either way, though. Furthermore, it's reasonable to doubt the footage's veracity in terms of timing given the enormous panic around 9/11 that soon followed its recording. Whatever the case, the hidden security tapes are the most significant lead into Sneha's disappearance and contribute to the innumerable ideas that have been developed since Ron's first attempts to track down his missing wife. Now let's discuss the most widely accepted ideas of Sneha's disappearance. In the years after America's Darkest Hour, a variety of ideas regarding Sneha's and Philip's status have spread like wildfire through the internet and investigative organizations. The majority of them ideas conclude that Snarl was a victim of the 9/11 disaster and had some connection to it. But the most radical notion deviating from that line of reasoning came from the NYPD, the organization in charge of tracking Snare down. Following months of contemplation, Ron decided to use all available resources to locate his wife, which is why he paid Ken Gallant for his services. This was caused in part by the NYPD's extraordinarily heavy caseload after the 9/11 attacks, as well as their initial lack of interest in Sneha's case. They refused to look into it further, insisting she was most likely a victim of the Twin Towers attack. Ron was initially shocked, thinking his wife couldn't have been at the towers and certain that something had happened to her the previous evening. Fortunately, both guys changed their minds and realized that Sneha was most likely a victim of 9/11 thanks to Ken Gallant's expert understanding and investigative work. In an odd turn of events, however, as Ron and Gallant arrived at this conclusion, law enforcement reverted to Ron's initial hypothesis. It turned out that Sneha had caused her own disappearance. Thus, the NYPD was looking into her disappearance from that angle. Naturally, Ron demanded a thorough explanation, as any bewildered widower would. Having recently come to terms with the devastating reality that his wife and 3,000 other people perished on September 11, 2001. Was there something he missed? It turned out that the NYPD had been compiling a fairly extensive and thorough history of Sneha's life, one that was centered on her legal troubles and other personal problems that Ron had long since ceased linking to her disappearance, rather than her medical degree or her love of painting. Beginning with Sneha's last days as a resident of the Cabrini Medical Center, where she completed her internship, these in-death reports were written. Since Sneha was considered an intern, she was not eligible for a direct termination. She was, however, advised that her contract would not be renewed because of problems resulting from her alcohol usage and tardiness. Sneha continued to socialize outside of the medical center with her former co-workers in spite of this. Shortly after receiving the unfavorable news, Sneha went out to a bar with her friends one evening to socialize and have a few drinks. Sneha, on the other hand, had a violent argument with one of her younger friends and ended up spending the next 12 hours in jail. Sneha allegedly filed a criminal complaint with the police alleging that one of the interns had touched her improperly and groped her. This in turn was also taken into custody and charged with forcible touching. However, following a brief probe, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office and the NYPD decided to dismiss the charges against the alleged intern. Instead, they made a complete 180-degree turn and charged Sneha with a misdemeanor for filing a false complaint. If you find this hard to hear, try to envision how Sneha felt at the time. Furthermore, she was informed by the prosecution team that if she merely withdrew the first complaint, all charges would be withdrawn. She was not at all comfortable with this. She was not going to give up on her assault tale and stop advocating for herself. She so rejected the DA's offer and persisted with her first assertion. Sneha was consequently placed in handcuffs and given a one-night jail sentence, which she complied with by spending the night in meditation with another prisoner. But the NYPD reports didn't end there. They even went so far as to incorporate Ron's contribution to Sneha's life, or rather, its seeming absence, in the equation. Official reports state that Sneha was found to have been spending whole evenings out in Manhattan with random people and people she would meet at the several homosexual, LGBTQ+ friendly clubs including Julie's, Henrietta Hudson's, and Meow Mix. The problem was, Ron was aware of his wife's late-night antics. He informed her it was okay as long as she called to let him know she was safe and in good hands, even though he didn't know the identities of every acquaintance she made. Furthermore, Ron informed the NYPD that Sneha's choice of bars had no bearing on their marital status. Ron provided an excellent answer, stating that Sneha had no interest in being approached at regular bars, particularly after the intern episode had such a negative outcome for her. But the NYPD's fabricated charges didn't end there. A purported interview with Sneha's brother, who claimed to have told police he had witnessed Sneha having sex with his girlfriend at the time, was also included in their files. However, when asked about this during the appeal hearing, Sneha's brother angrily denied ever having said these things, much less taking part in an interrogation concerning that particular incident in general. Most damning of all, according to the police records, Sneha and Ron got into a heated verbal altercation on the grounds of the courtroom on September 10, 2001, following a court procedure for her criminal charge appeal. Ron stormed off, leaving Sneha stunned on her own. The issue is that Ron claims this never happened. He claimed that although they had a purposeful conversation, nothing got out of hand, and that he left for work as usual following his morning's proceedings at the court. Given all of these fabricated incidents and circumstantial evidence, the police concluded that Sneha had vanished on her own volition. Either she would fall into problems for her late-night antics, or she would use 9/11 to stage her own death and flee in order to start over, running away from the sins that followed her. But Ken Gallant had already ruled out a staged death. Though he conducted the appropriate research, he had the same first suspicions. Searching Stina's computer files, Gallant saw nothing that would typically indicate someone looking into beginning a new life. She also stored her passports, glasses, driver's license, and nearly all of her credit cards in the apartments. The most obvious clue was the glasses. She hardly ever traveled outside of the boundaries of New York City without them. Could Sneha have been killed on her night out, as the NYPD initially believed, if she had not fled? Though it's not likely, it's also not impossible. Sneha had already spent the evening drinking and socializing at bars and new acquaintances' apartments throughout the city. Not only did she know who not to hang out with, but she also clearly understood the risks that women in large cities confront when they go to bars. Had she not known how to protect herself and noticed the warning signs, she would not have done what she did. Additionally, there was no illegal activity on September 10th night that would have called for a murder investigation. There were no unresolved murders, missing Indian women, bar shootings, or documented abductions. Of course, on September 11th, there were hardly any crimes reported at all, and at the end of the day, there had only been one unsolved homicide. A pattern of disappearances outside the obvious Twin Towers fatalities in the days preceding and after 9/11 has likewise not been found in the New York City area. Actually, there is just one contested report of missing persons during the week of September 11th. That is Fernando Molinar's situation. When Molinar spoke to his mother over the phone on September 8, 2001, about his new employment at a nearby pizzeria close to the World Trade Center, that was the last time anyone saw or heard from him. Although his actual start date was never disclosed, he hadn't started yet. A Dutchess County judge rejected the petition in January 2004 to list him as an official death, even though he appeared to 911 as a clear candidate for victim status. Sneha and Molinar are not really related, other than the fact that they were both immigrants to the United States. In regards to Sneha and Philip's case, we concur with her husband, Ron, private investigator, Ken Gallen, the Philip family, and, as of late, the whole Dutchess County courts that Sneha died as a consequence of the World Trade Center attacks on September 11, 2001. In addition, we think Sneha was under a lot of pressure to start a new life and job, go to medical school, and deal with many important issues in her life. But it was not the kind of incident that would make someone want to start over and throw everything away. It wasn't Sneha's medical license or capacity to practice that was lost. It was her employment. After all, she had another job already. It would have been more logical for Sneha to spend the night at the locations that brought her the greatest joy. That morning, she had to handle a tense court session and felt it was preferable to stay out after shopping all evening. Who knows where she went exactly? Asking people where they were on September 10th isn't exactly fair because for some New Yorkers who were present during the event and do not understand the fascination or desire to talk about it in the same way that the rest of the world often does, talking about 911 is an extremely triggering topic. Although regrettable, it's a valid issue, and it deserves our respect. All we can say is that it makes perfect sense that Sneha would have run to Ground Zero on Tuesday morning to assist in any way she could after witnessing the attacks taking place at the Twin Towers. The first indication is clear. Sneha had dedicated the better part of 6 years of her life to following in her father's footsteps and becoming a doctor. She wanted to continue his legacy of kindness and concern for everyday people because she was moved by it. When it came right down to it, she wanted to use her skills to help keep more people alive, and well because she loved them. Sneha would have been among the first to put her head down and take action if a jet had crashed into the Twin Towers, and there had been an obvious crisis. At the time of her disappearance, Sneha was also thinking about the World Trade Center. Do you recall the September 10th instant messaging exchange she had with her mother? She mentioned visiting the Windows on the World restaurants located on the 106th and 107th levels of North Tower 1 WTC. The motivation was a spring 2002 wedding that Sneha would be attending. A friend of hers was being married at the Windows on the World venue. That gave rise to the desire. When Sneha saw the top of the North Tower on fire on the morning of 9/11, it's conceivable that this was the first thing she thought about. Maybe it was her excellent friend who was in serious danger up there. We don't know if Sneha was the woman in the security video from the apartment lobby because we haven't seen the tapes or Sneha herself. But based on a few distinct characteristics, we can infer from the descriptions given and the admissions made by her husband and an investigating detective that the woman did seem to be Sneha. In the end, there were indications that Sneha was still alive just 1 minute before to the 9/11 plane crash. There were no clues or indicators after those awful hours, and Sneha and Philip vanished by dusk, just like almost 3,000 other people had. There is still a possibility that Sneha's remains will be recognized. During the cleanup work following the 9/11 attacks, investigators gathered almost 22,000 individual pieces of human remains from Ground Zero. Many of these have not yet been compared to DNA provided by victims' relatives who want to obtain confirmation of the whereabouts of their loved ones. Snares is among the 1347 victims of 9/11 whose remains have not yet been located. It could happen that a match appears one day, but as time has gone on, the process of identifying victims has become more and more difficult because a large portion of the DNA either repeats itself or is missing from the system of samples that have been submitted. Even though it's unlikely that we will ever learn the precise circumstances behind Sneha and Philip's deaths, we can still honor her memory as the compassionate physician that she was, a compassionate idealist who aspired to restore health, cure illness, and improve the lives of everyone she encountered. She made the greatest sacrifice in order to fulfill her mission when she passed away. Doctor, it's not clear how many people. No matter how many people Philip looked after that morning beneath the smoking towers, her legacy will endure. We will exhibit our memories and restore honor to the names Sneha and Philip in commemoration of the 3,000 souls lost, and the numerous lives affected by the terrible consequences that have since taken root after September 11, 2001. Moving on to the next case. Lam Corwin. Lam Corwin was the first serial killer to strike Hong Kong in 1982. Although he worked as a taxi driver during the day, he was also known as the Rainy Night Butcher and the Jars Killer. Over the course of 7 months, he killed 4 young ladies, burying their bodies under his family's couch and preserving body parts in jars. Every murder was more horrific than the last, involving everything from body parts amputation to asphyxia. Every one of them was documented in spooky films. This man, who was he? And what deranged ideas motivated him? How could these women have become his gullible target? Lam Corwin was born on May 22, 1955, in the center of Hong Kong, and had a challenging childhood. With 2 mistresses, a legitimate wife, and 10 kids, his father Lam Wylock led a difficult existence. This set the stage for Lam's turbulent upbringing. Lam experienced severe treatment during his formative years. His father violently abused both him and his birth mother when they were living in Malaysia. When Lam was a child, his parents divorced, but it didn't make things any easier. His father's violent attitude stemmed from a horrific event in which he banged his head against a wall, breaking Lam's skull and rendering him unconscious at the age of 2. Following a stay in Brunei from 1957 to 1962, where Lam shared a dormitory with his father's half-siblings and mistresses, he went back to Hong Kong. Even though she did well academically in elementary school, there were difficulties when she transferred to Ricci Middle School in Sham, Shui Pi, for junior high school in 1968. Due to his father's work, Lam had to balance 2 jobs and school, which had an effect on his performance, particularly in maths. By 1970, his scholastic ranking had declined due to the pressures of managing his father's motorbike shop after school. Severe therapy marked the further collapse of his relationship with his father. Lam also started running away from home a lot as a result of this. It had set in as a pattern in his life, one that lasted into middle school. Lam had formally begun working in his father's motorbike shop after completing his secondary education. Later on, he went on to learn how to service air conditioners from a relative. All of this, with its familial issues and difficult moments, had prepared Lam Corwin to become the enigmatic figure he would later become. He'd been banished from his house in early 1973 after a falling out with his father. He forced a woman into a public lavatory on Hock Yuan Street and hung home with a knife, and then groped her indecently there. His arrest resulted from this incident. After a medical evaluation, it was determined that Lam had mental health problems, which made him ineligible for a trial or jail. He was thus given a treatment term at King Shan Mental Hospital. Following 102 days of medical care, he was released from the hospital and chose to adopt the name Lam Jokum. By the time he was 19, his family had become aware of his strange preoccupation with the feminine form and his stash of pornography kept within a metal ammunition box. His family did make an effort to assist him, but it didn't seem to be working. His behavior became increasingly unsettling as a result of his inability to be satisfied by these behaviors. After acquiring a Polaroid camera, he started capturing clandestine photos of ladies from beneath lavatory doors, which in turn led the women to pursue him down the street. Later on at their Kwanhong home, he was caught glancing at his sister as she undressed outside the bathroom. The family decided to move to a new location in Tokwa Wan as a result. He shared a room with his younger brother at their new house, using separate bunk bed compartments to divide the space. There was an arrangement. Their possessions were to be kept apart, unhindered by the other side. He got his taxi driver's license in 1978 and went by Lam Cohen to begin his official taxi driving career. He was switched to a night schedule about 1980, which meant that his family would only get to see him every 14 to 15 days. He then became suddenly interested in photography in 1981, which led him to start studying this art form. But since he didn't have a darkroom at home to print color images, he went looking for a photo studio. He enrolled in a photography course offered by the Chinese YMCA of Hong Kong at the Waterloo Road Association in order to avoid being suspected. One of his classmates was using Photoshop Tim Shashue. Lam made up a tale, saying that she was a part-time photographer who worked in a mortuary and needed help taking autopsy pictures. Amazingly, his account was approved, and in order to prevent colleagues from becoming alarmed, the fellow student created Lam's images. When he drove a night taxi for a year, his mother saw a marked shift in his behavior. He began to disregard personal hygiene, declining to take a shower or change into new clothes. His mother even saw him wandering home in the middle of the night, like a sleepwalker, as his demeanor turned hopeless. At the age of 27, Lam changed on the dreary night of February 3, 1982, from a simple peeping Tom to something more evil. One day, when he was working as a taxi driver in the Tsim Sha Tsui neighborhood, he was looking for clients who were coming home after a night out. And this is where the situation became gloomy. Chan Fong Lan, a clearly drunk woman, emerged from a restaurant at around 4 in the morning, in dire need of a ride. Many taxi drivers refused to take her because of the condition she was in. Lam, who didn't appear to care, welcomed her inside his taxi and offered to drive her home despite this. Halfway through the ride, the inebriated woman asked to halt. Lam also opened the door to throw up as she braked close to a petrol station. Uncertain about her location after this unpleasant incident, she requested Lam to head back the other way. Lam later admitted that he had been reluctant to murder her at first because he was disgusted by her vomiting, but that changed when he decided he could take no more. Still in the Tsim Sha Tsui neighborhood, he went into a garage, circled to the passenger door, and strangled the girl with an electric line. He drove to his house at 5 in the morning, when he usually ended work, and parked in front of the building. He hid the body in a big bag and moved it across the pavement inside his flat building as the street was empty. When Lam went by, the night watchman, who was sleeping on a cot in the entry hall, was still asleep. He moved as stealthily as he could into the apartment, concealing the body beneath the sofa. Lam stayed in his bed for several hours, pretending to sleep while he waited for his family to leave after breakfast. He woke up and got ready in his room after his brother and parents left the flat. Taking 500 yuan out of the victim's pocket, Lam went to the street and bought a power saw. To ensure that everything was well protected, including the baseboards, he covered the floor with plastic. He began to dismember the unfortunate woman's body after placing it on the plastic. Even though he took great care to ensure that no blood was left behind, some of it ended up splashing into the walls. He continued to dismember the victim's body for hours, taking pictures and recordings of the entire procedure. He then gave the videotape the name Serious Secret. He dissected her body into 7 parts, sealing the head, limbs, and torso in a plastic bag after wrapping them in paper. The thing that disturbed me the most was that he preserved the genitalia in a Tupperware container using rice wine. He meticulously cleared the crime scene, wiped the walls and floor, and rolled up the plastic sheet, making sure that nothing remained of the horrific events that had occurred. He stayed hidden from onlookers, making multiple visits to deliver the body parts to his taxi. Feeling confident that he had removed all traces of the unsettling deed, he took his car to the new areas. He halted when he came upon an empty area on the banks of the Xingman River close to Chaten. He was determined to find a remote location to dispose of the body. He removed each parcel from his trunk one at a time and tossed them into the river, making sure no one was watching. The bundles were carried out to sea by the murky waves. The torrential rain carried the limbs from Lucky Plaza to the Bel Air Gardens neighborhood. where they drifted. On the radio, more than a week after the horrific deed, Lam had learnt of a terrifying discovery. On the Shingman River's bank, a limb had been found. More body pieces were found in disturbing ways in the following days, allowing the police to piece together the awful puzzle. Tidal patterns were utilized by investigators to calculate the moment the body was dumped into the river. Notably, one of the arms had an uncommon tattoo, a knife-through heart that was uncommon for a woman to have at the time. This is what helped them figure out who the victim was. It was Chanfeng Lan, age 21. Even after the authorities issued a public call for witnesses, they encountered regrettable difficulties. The taxi driver did not approach, and the license plate went unnoticed by Chanfeng Lan's friends. Lam didn't learn about the body parts discovery for over a week. The mother of 2 children and nightclub hostess in Tsim Sha Sui, Chanfeng Lan, was identified by the authorities as the deceased person. The graphic details describe Chan's night out with her friends and sister, her taxi ride home, and the terrible end Lam Corwin dealt her. Lam Corwin had been opportunistic in his first murder, but he had planned his second one very carefully. Being a perfectionist, he was determined to be more organized. He chose to use professional equipment rather than a power saw because he was aiming for surgical precision. He had read up on knives, blades, and scissors, and had even gone so far as to buy specialty surgical instruments and multiple bottles of formaldehyde. Formaldehyde was a colorless, strong-smelling chemical that was used for disinfection and preservation. 3 days after buying his apparatus, on May 29, 1982, Lam had taken another victim. He succeeded with his second target, a pub employee. This time, he picked Chanwan Kit Cooley and used an electric cord to strangle her before escorting her home. He waited in bed, like before, for his family to get home from work before beginning the grisly chore of dismembering the body. Lam had carefully planned the room and given it careful thought for days before acting. In order to keep the floor clear of bloodstains, he had placed a sizable tray underneath the body before getting his video camera. Investigators found that he had positioned the tray beneath the family's parakeet cage after reviewing the footage again. Lam displayed remarkable competence as he dissected the body with meticulous care. After he had done slicing it apart, Lam snapped another photo of each bodily part. After much deliberation and numerous nighttime excursions, he eventually discovered the ideal location for disposing of the body. This time, he packed the body parts inside a large plastic bag and put it in the trunk of his cab. He drove to Hong Kong Island through the tunnel early in the morning. The selected location, a heavily forested residential neighborhood called Taihang Road, was located 20 minutes east of the city center. He parked in a conspicuous area of the street and then began to struggle to get the bulky bag out of the trunk. He took it a little distance up to the railing, where he watched it tumble into a muddy gully as he hurled the body over it. Lam thought back on that night's events often in the days that followed, not out of regret or guilt, but rather out of a desire to better himself. 2 weeks later, he made another attack. On June 17, 1982, Ling Xiaowan, a 29-year-old nightclub cleaner, got off the job at 4 in the morning and got into Lam's taxi. She soon suffered her terrible end. Lam took her corpse back to his house and performed a horrifying set of acts on her. He recorded his horrifying deeds, taking pictures and filming them, giving the recording the title Operation Rainy Night. Lam recorded the act of dismemberment with his camcorder set up on the bunk bed, using the selfie feature to capture an uncomfortable degree of detail over what he had done before. This time, he proceeded to cut open the abdomen, remove the bowel, and even try to taste human flesh before giving up on the idea since it made him queasy. Then, on Taihang Road, he abandoned the severed limbs in a Hessian bag, starting yet another horrible chapter in this gruesome rampage. Lam had grown bolder with every crime. He had been meticulously planning his next heist at this period. Knowing the pubs in the Tsim Sha Sui neighborhood, he was aware of the locations where women frequently waited for his cab by themselves. He had intended for the next victim to be a woman from a higher social class, but his first 3 victims had been what he had dubbed terrible girls. He purposefully chose a young woman who looked naive, and it was Ling Wei Sum, 17, this time. On July 2nd, 1982, Lam had discovered her outside the Tsim Sha Sui Hotel. Before the final examinations, she had gone to a party at her high school, but she had made the decision to leave after supper. To make sure she got home safely, her high school pals had put her in a taxi. After guiding her to a remote road, Lam parked his vehicle. When he took her wrist and chained her to the front seat, the youngster was horrified. He couldn't have gone home that early. It was just 9:30 p.m. However, he had another purpose for wanting to keep her in his vehicle. Unexpectedly, he desired companionship. He desired to speak with her. He was lonely and in need of company. So he spent hours tying Ling up with questions about her life in general, her family, and her religion. All in all, Lam was having fun with her company. That was insufficient to derail his ghastly scheme. Around 4 in the morning, the adolescent dozed off. At this point, Lam began using the electric cable to strangle her. After that, he carried the defenseless girl's lifeless body home and went about his daily business of waiting for his family to vacate the flat. He recorded after he made sure no one was home by mounting his video camera on a high shelf. This was the footage that the police would eventually play in court. The video was quite unsettling. Lam was acting inappropriately and necrophiliacally with the dead body in the video. It was significant to observe that the young victim's thighs had been burned by a lamp that had fallen on them earlier when he was setting up the lighting apparatus to record his actions. In order to later refer to it as the fourth operation, he also recorded it on camera and took pictures of her. Then he dismembered the body, just as he had done with the victims who would subsequently return to torment him. He left the body on Taihang Road thereafter. On August 10, 1982, Lam attempted to expand the picture of his fourth victim that had been severed. By coincidence, Lam's friend's Photoshop enlarger was broken, so Lam's negatives were sent to the Mung Kok branch to be magnified. The branch's picture editors discovered disturbing elements in the processed images during the manual enlargement process, suggesting a possible connection to the mutilation of a human body. Despite his suspicions, the shop supervisor called the police because of elements such as an image of a severed breast and a burn mark on the victim's thigh. The Kowloon Regional Homicide Squad was given the case by the police once they received the report. Detective Sergeant Lee Kwon guided detectives in getting statements from the Tsim Sha Sui and Mong Kok branch clerks, obtaining the negatives and pictures. Comprehensive examinations were carried out by the Scientific Forensics Department's forensic officer. The corpse in the photo had been dead for less than 3 hours, according to an analysis of the skin and blood color. The dismemberment style indicated a lack of medical anatomical understanding on the part of the culprit, ruling out the notion that they were instructional images. The standard green sheet used for autopsies was conspicuously missing. Experts in forensics also verified that the images were taken directly from a real corpse rather than from printed material. Plus, in one picture, a tiny droplet of water mirrored half the face of a girl who looked like Ling Wei Sim, who had disappeared on July 2nd. The police decided to make an arrest after coming to the conclusion that Lang had been murdered based on the findings of the Scientific Forensics Division and the medical examiner. Sergeant Lee had led the crew in an ambush at the photo shop early on August 17th. He asked the clerk to combine a few more pictures with Lam's collection of 13 and encouraged him to talk with Lam about the pictures, where they were taken, and why they were enlarged. The intention was to capture the dialogue and acquire proof. Lam arrived by cab at around 6 o'clock in the evening to pick up the pictures. In response to his friend's request, he carefully examined each picture and clarified that the larger versions would be utilized for courtroom presentations, especially so jurors could see the contents more clearly. According to Lam, he worked in several mortuaries on a regular basis. Sergeant Lee revealed his name, verified the pictures, and made the payment. He then arrested Lam. At first, Lam made up a false narrative, claiming that the images belonged to a purported four-eyed man from the Oriental Daily that he was going to see at Tokwawan. Investigations, however, showed that there was no such individual. As a result, the authorities moved quickly to acquire a search warrant so they could examine Lam's home in the allotted 48 hours and gather tangible evidence. They would have had to release him otherwise. In Lamb's cabinets, they found surgical instruments, personal belongings, preservatives, anatomical books, and severed body parts, including the dead women's breasts and vaginas. Additionally, his taxi was seized and searched by the police, who also left a notice on the windscreen indicating that it was involved in a crime and instructing not to have it towed. After the car was examined further, evidence was found in the glove compartment, including wire and handcuffs. There were also 2 holes in the back of the front seat, which were probably made by one of the dead women's high heels during a struggle. Investigators allegedly uncovered a vast archive that included 696 negatives, 1,500 color slides, and 1,900 carefully classified photos that showed Corwin's victims at different points in his crimes. His careful documentation greatly facilitated the police inquiry. The body parts of all his victims were eventually found by authorities, allowing for their identification and return to their individual families. To help with the inquiry, Lamb Corwin was taken to the police station with his father and younger brother. Authorities thought that Lamb and his brother had not acted alone, given their small living area and the amount of evidence found in their single bedroom. After being detained and questioned extensively for 3 days, Lynn was freed. The younger Lamb stated that he had little contact with his brother because of their divergent schedules and that he was unaware of or did not participate in the incidents. Their father and younger brother pushed Corwin to make it clear that they had nothing to do with it in order to expedite their release. Lamb's mother went to the police station also, hoping to talk her son into confessing. Corwin helped the police identify the victims' body parts, but even with their assistance, the police continued to suspect that the younger Lamb might be involved. As a result, the 2 brothers were brought before the Sampo Kong Magistrates Court and charged with 4 charges of murder. After that, they were moved to the Sue Lam Psychiatric Center for evaluation. In keeping with the younger brother's repeated claims of innocence, he was ultimately freed following the 6th hearing on the grounds of inadequate evidence. In the meantime, a medical examination determined that Corwin was competent to stand trial, demonstrated an extraordinarily high IQ, reportedly over 130, and was of sound mind. After the establishment of prima facie evidence, the matter was forwarded to the Supreme Court for a trial. On March 3, 1983, the trial began, and a large crowd gathered outside the court to see Lamb's behavior. The case's specifics, according to the authorities, were too upsetting for women. To guarantee a fair trial, 7 carefully chosen male jurors were chosen. Only the jurors, judges, and attorneys were permitted to watch Lamb's videotapes so ordered to avoid shock. The organs of the victim were also kept out of the courtroom. The prosecution called witnesses throughout the trial, including members of Lamb's family, the police office, Photoshop employees, and forensic and scientific specialists. Acknowledging the strength of the evidence against him, Lamb attempted to reach a compromise by confessing to manslaughter in return for a shorter sentence, but this appeal was turned down. The jury was instructed by the court to choose between manslaughter and murder charges rather than discuss Lamb's culpability. The trial featured testimony from 5 psychiatrists and delves into arguments over Lamb's mental health. 2 questioned his self-control, while 3 implied an infatuation with women. 18 days later, on April 8th of that year, the judge gave the jury instructions to find that Lamb had some degree of control over his conduct during the crimes. Following more than 3 hours of discussion, the jury unanimously concluded that Lamb was guilty of murder, insane. Lamb was originally given a hanging death sentence, but thanks to the governor's pardon, his sentence was reduced to life in prison when Hong Kong abolished the death penalty in 1984. Following his conviction, Lamb was first housed at Stanley Prison before being moved to Shekpik Prison, where he was known to the other convicts as Al Lamb. He was a reserved man who avoided talking about his history and preferred to be by himself. According to reports, he was paid little, kept to himself, and didn't socialize much. He took part in Catholic and Christian classes while incarcerated and read newspapers, medical, and religious materials. He didn't have any family visits, although he did occasionally get visits from church volunteers. Newspapers and books littered his cell, and he became well known among the other prisoners for his expertise in purple star astrology, a kind of Chinese fortune-telling. Prison guards asked him for advice. Lam applied for parole in 2018, after serving for more than 34 years at the age of 62, which alarmed the public. The parole board reviews the case every 5 years. However, at that time, they decided not to grant parole due to worries about the possibility of repeat offenses. Additionally, according to reports, Lam was observed by some inmates making elaborate displays out of cockroaches that were kept in matchboxes. Lam's mother testified during the 1983 trial regarding the physical abuse her oldest son suffered as a youngster. She described how Corwin's father had been abusive, even inflicting significant head damage on the boy when he was only 2 years old, which left him with 2 black eyes. She had been abused as a child in the household as well. Experts have connected serious brain traumas sustained as a kid to psychological problems later in life, including necrophilia. According to reports, Lam told a doctor that he thought God had given him the go-ahead to carry out the murders. There is still uncertainty around Lam's behavior after the probe. Investigators were baffled as to why, despite having the appropriate equipment, he chose to process films at a Kodak store. Others surmised that, having been dangerously close to being arrested once, he may have secretly wanted to be arrested. The gruesome results of the autopsy and the manner in which the victims were mutilated suggested the presence of a skilled killer. Nevertheless, because of the case's publicity, Lam's family had difficulties in spite of these horrifying facts. They tried to sell their flat, but the high profile of the building made it difficult, so they were forced to stay. After the investigation was closed, the police destroyed all of Lam's videos and images out of concern for possible public attention. Nevertheless, a few of the victims' organs had an unexpected outcome. For instructional reasons, they are kept at the Wan Chai Forensic Medicine headquarters. In a somber acknowledgement of the lives lost to his son's malice, Lam's father dedicated a memorial tablet at Yuanjing College on November 16, 1986, hoping to atone for his son's transgressions. We must pay tribute to these 4 innocent women whose lives were sadly lost as we come to the end of Lam Corwin's eerie tale. The story of Lam Corwin serves as a chilling reminder of the intricacies of the human psyche and the terrible outcomes they can have. These are clear reminders that mental health needs to be given more attention and that a greater knowledge of it is necessary. In the maximum security Shekpik prison on Lontu Island, Lam Corwin, now 68, is serving a life sentence for the gruesome killings that rocked Hong Kong in the early 1980s. His reputation as the first serial killer in the city was cemented into history. At the age of 27, his horrific reign came to an end on August 17, 1982, the day of his arrest. His eerie post-crime customs, such as concealing victims under the family sofa and cannibalizing body parts, led to him being dubbed the Rainy Night Butcher and the Jars Murderer. Such unsettling behaviors provide a terrifying image of a troubled mind. Moving on to the next case. Magali Park. On January 17, 1982, Eric Bertrand, a truck driver, and Evelyn, a housewife and stay-at-home mother, welcomed Magali into the world. Was raised in the town of Langhans and was the oldest of 5 children. When she was 12 years old, her parents got divorced in 1994, and her father then moved to Switzerland to start a new life and get married again. Nevertheless, she stayed in touch with him, and they had a close relationship. Feeling hurt by the separation, Magali decided to stay in France and live with her mother. She met Jeffrey Park, a 23-year-old, on July 12, 1998, at the age of 16. Jeffrey was raised in a violent home. Jeffrey was placed in foster care for a portion of his childhood, while his father, Patrick, struggled with alcoholism. But as an adult, he had made amends and put his connection with his father back together. He had just spent a few days in jail after his ex-girlfriend accused him of domestic abuse when he first met Magali. After finding out about Jeffrey's past, Magali's mother voiced distaste for the young guy. After a falling out between mother and daughter, Magali moved in with her father and started working as a caregiver at a retirement community. The 18-year-old Magali wed Jeffrey in 2000. After relocating to the town of Warnix, Magali started working at a do-it-yourself store, and her husband found work as a painter and decorator. Magali fed Jeffrey breakfast on March 26, 2001, before he departed for work. That day, he wasn't scheduled to be at work, but for unknown reasons, he either chose to go in or was requested to. While they were eating, Magali informed him that she intended to walk their Rottweiler puppy to a convenience store to get cigarettes. It was just a 2.5-mile journey there and back. However, when Jeffrey got home at 4:30 from work, he found that neither his wife nor his new puppy were there. Since Magali had prepared breakfast, the kitchen had not been cleaned up. The 19-year-old was usually a tidy person who cleaned up after herself, so this was really strange. Jeffrey called Magali's parents, who had not seen her, out of concern. When he arrived at her job at around 5 o'clock in the evening, he discovered that she had not reported sick and had not shown up for her afternoon shift. After that, Jeffrey reported his wife missing at the police station. After that, he went back to his house and enlisted the aid of a friend with an ATV to assist him in his search for Magali. In order to get some rest, they decided to end the quest at around 5 in the morning. Around 11 in the morning, a young man who was picking mushrooms next to his uncle's farm found the body of a woman. She had been burned and was just half clothed. The man believed at first that someone had dropped a mannequin, but upon closer inspection, he saw that his assumption was incorrect. After he ran to his uncle's farm, they made a police call. Investigators recognized the deceased as 19-year-old Mag parties using the report that Jeffrey submitted and personalized jewelry engraved with the couple's names and wedding dates. They found a chocolate bar wrapper, a knife with its blade wedged into a tree, and a cigarette but next to the body. They found a gasoline-filled jerry 300 meters away. After analysis, it was discovered that the cigarette but belonged to a Moroccan brand that was only available in Switzerland. Interestingly, investigators discovered no evidence of a fire at the site where Magali's body was discovered, indicating to them that she was killed elsewhere and her remains were subsequently disposed of in the woodlands. 2 days after Magali disappeared, on March 28th, an autopsy was performed. She had been assaulted, sustaining 12 fractures across her body. The medical examiner was unable to ascertain the precise moment of her death because she had been burned later. In addition, Magali's cause of death has never been made public. Additionally, the ME found sperm within the 19-year-old's body, indicating that she had engaged in sexual activity 48 hours before her passing. But there was nothing to suggest that she had experienced sexual assault. The ME discovered a prescription drug for anxiety inside her veins. Investigators were never able to locate a prescription for the medicine in Magali's name, and neither Jeffrey nor her family was aware that she was using it. Even though Magali didn't smoke this brand, further examination of the cigarette, but that was found at the site revealed that her DNA was present. Even stranger, investigators discovered that the cigarette had been thrown away following the 19-year-old's passing. It also prompted law officials to speculate about the likelihood of manufactured seeds. Magali's possessions were not found with her death, and have not been found again in the years that have passed. However, the Rottweiler puppy showed up 5.5 miles from Hornix in the town of Kosi, unhurt and hungry. The puppy was clean and dry even though it had been raining between the 26th and 28th. She had the scent of Magali's fragrances too. She lost her leash, which has never been found, even though the dog might have interacted with the offender. Jeffrey received her back from the police instead of having her examined for forensic evidence. Following Magali's last known actions, the investigators discovered that the 19-year-old had gone out with 2 pals the day before she passed away. Investigators learned from one of the acquaintances that Magali had said her that year's birthday present of underwear was from Jeffrey's father, Patrick. Magali checked her voicemail and shut off her phone at 10 o'clock that same day. The man's uncle, who discovered her death that morning, said that his dogs had been barking nonstop for some time, maybe sensing someone in the woods. This happened at 2 and 5 in the morning. Regarding his role, Patrick doesn't seem to have ever addressed the fact that he gave lingerie to his daughter-in-law. Jeffrey dismissed the accusation as untrue. On the 26th, the day of Magley's disappearance, Patrick says he went to the couple's home at 10 in the morning to get the mail, but she wasn't there. The reason Patrick's mail was at the couple's house is unknown. Someone tried to withdraw about a $400 from an ATM on the 26th in the town of St. John Boys at 1 p.m., but they were unable because they had entered the incorrect PIN. But this person also had Jeffrey's credit card, so they took a $35 out of his accounts. It seems that the unidentified person knew his PIN. The specifics of what happened are unknown, since we were unable to locate any information that would have explained how the murderer had gotten Jeffrey's credit card, or whether or not he had reported missing. Magley was in this same town on the day of her death, between 9:30 and 11 a.m., according to 3 other eyewitnesses. Her family doesn't know how or why she came to be here. The 19-year-old didn't have a car, therefore it was a very lengthy walk for them to get Smokes on foot. Nonetheless, every eyewitness has acknowledged that they could not be positive that the young woman they saw was Magley. Magley's case has not received much media coverage throughout the years. Her family has been dissatisfied with the investigation's lack of progress and has regularly expressed their suffering to the media because the murder happened close to them. Given that the murder happened near the Swiss border, journalists there started to show an interest in the case and start discussing it, eventually exposing multiple shortcomings on the part of the police. They said that photos of tire tracks discovered at the scene have been lost, DNA samples have been lost, and then found again during the investigation. And the police have been so convinced that Magley was the victim of a random attack that they had not looked into other options in detail. The intensity of the attack suggested that the 19-year-old was the target of great anger. However, their automobiles were not inspected, and friends, relatives, and co-workers were not appropriately questioned. Law police also thought that Magley had been seen that day in a different place by the eyewitnesses. They therefore did not look into alternative hypotheses and firmly felt that she had vanished at the time of the last sighting. Jeffrey, Magley's spouse, was excluded from consideration as a suspect due to his unwavering alibi and non-existence. 3 years after her passing, in 2004, it was found that the 19-year-old had missed multiple days of work in the months before the crime. Nevertheless, this information was unknown to Jeffrey and the other family members. 2 years later, Patrick and Jeffrey were detained by the police and interrogated. In the end, they were freed because there was insufficient evidence to connect either man to the crime. Although Jeffrey has never disclosed the identity of the attacker to the public, it is said that he knows who they are. When Magley vanished, according to his father, who was questioned over the lingerie episodes, he was at home. His alibi's degree of tightness is unknown. Since then, there have been very little updates on Magley's situation. Eric, her father, organized fundraisers in 2015 to enable the family to employ a private detective. The private investigation company confirmed to media what they already knew. The police made numerous mistakes during the initial investigation and might have overlooked important details as a result. Magley's body was excavated in 2016 to conduct more analysis, but no meaningful results were obtained. Jeffrey, Magley's husband, remarried and had 4 children with his new spouse after she passed away. He committed suicide on September 15, 2018. Magley's parents are unsure on how to handle his suicide as well, whether it sprung from sorrow over losing Magley or from guilt. His new wife claims the murder haunted the couple for the whole of their marriage, despite the fact that he made no reference of his murdered wife in his suicide notes. Fingerprints were found on the cigarette, but that was recovered from the crime scene after a re-examination. But they belonged to an unidentified person. The prints was too strong for Jeffrey or his father Patrick. The case is still unresolved. Moving on to the next case. Patricia Chupko Bender. Susan Robin Bender, Patricia Chupko Bender's only child, was born on November 27, 1970, in Modesto, California. On April 25, 1986, 15-year-old Susan left her family's home to spend the weekend at her friend's beachside home in Carmel. She strolled by herself to the Greyhound bus station at 10th and G Street. While Susan was waiting for the bus, she ran into several friends. She told them about her trip to the shore and that she would be back in a few days. After their conversation, Susan called someone on the pay phone at the depot. A full-size 1977 Ford van with an olive green appearance pulled up 10 minutes later. Susan got into the vehicle. This is where Susan was last seen. It was common for a 15-year-old to enjoy this much independence in the 1980s. Patricia Bender, Susan's mother, assumed her daughter had made it to Carmel safely and was having fun with her friends. When Susan failed to make the customary phone call home, her mother became concerned. She reported her daughter missing on May 1st, 1986. The police came to the conclusion that Susan had met a horrific end quite fast. A detective informed the local newspaper, "We have specific evidence that suggests foul play was involved in Susan Bender's disappearance." Susan's mother told the same newspaper that even though Susan had run away from home twice before, she had always come back pretty fast. Patricia mentioned that our relationship had been going well for a few months before she disappeared. She showed no indication that she intended to flee. She said that Susan's clothes, diaries, and phone book had been found in the possession of an unidentified male subject of interest. Patricia said, "I fear that a man who was questioned by the police but was never taken into custody attacked her. They had a ton of circumstantial evidence against him, but they decided not to take him into custody." Susan's disappearance was never considered voluntary by the authorities. Detective Richard Rodinier informed a journalist in 1987 that he thought Susan was definitely dead. Rodinier worked on the investigation until he retired in 2000. In a 1999 interview with Susan's mother, the police claimed that in the absence of a body, there is not much they can do. Detective Ridenhorst stated that Susan Bender simply vanished off the face of the planet in that same year. The most bizarre aspect of this case is that no one has ever come forward to reveal what happened to her, and no information about her has arisen over the years. In 1999, young ladies in the surrounding Stockton region were also the target of two childhood friends from Linden, California, Lauren Herzog and Wesley Skirmantine. One could speculate that Susan was one of their victims. Many of their victims are still unknown. Even though the authorities were unaware of it, it's probable that the men were involved in Susan's kidnapping, even though she vanished while they were busy carrying out their nefarious plans. Their victim-focused approach was congruent with Susan's disappearance. But after years of research, Susan's case had never been linked to the crimes of Skirmantine or Herzog. The two bad companions went on a rampage between 1980 to 1990. Several ladies may have been among the 15 or more individuals they slaughtered. Susan's case, meanwhile, remained unresolved for nearly 40 years. Investigators spoke with friends and relatives who had fought to keep Susan's tale intact. Sandy Silveria, a friend of Susan's, remarked in 2021, "Where is she? What happened to her? Whoever did this needs to be held responsible." In an attempt to locate the long-lost teenager, the Modesto Police Department announced in October 2021 that they had revived the investigation. "We found possible areas of opportunity in this case review that could help advance this case. This includes using technical breakthroughs," the agency said in a statement. "We also believe that considering the circumstances surrounding the crime, there may be unidentified individuals who have knowledge of crucial information regarding Susan's disappearance." In the years since Susan disappeared, investigators investigating into cold cases in Modesto had anticipated that additional witnesses might feel compelled to come forward. The police agency said in a statement from 2022 that it was important to remember Susan was a small child living with her family. Unfortunately, it has taken the family 36 years to get justice or closure. It is our duty as a group to assist in bringing some sort of resolution to the situation while still working for justice. At last, the Modesto Police Department announced Raymond Lewis Stafford's arrest on Thursday, August 17, 2023. On August 15, 2023, Lewis, who is currently 76 years old, was taken into custody in Wills Point, 50 miles east of Dallas, where he had been living for almost 5 years. Stafford appeared to be living in plain sight for many years. Detectives were able to acquire an arrest warrant on August 10th, but the Texas Van Zandt County Sheriff's Department didn't show up at his house and take him into custody until Tuesday. After being captured without incident and being put into the Van Zandt County Jail, he was charged with Susan's murder. More details about what the Modesto police think occurred to Susan were not disclosed. While he awaits extradition to California, Raymond Lewis is now being held in custody in Texas. How precisely the detective focused on him as a possible suspect is unknown. Modesto police have been posing several unanswered questions to the Stanislaus County District Attorney's Office, but they say they don't have any further information to provide. Newspapers and local radio stations got in touch with the Stanislaus County District Attorney and the Modesto Police Department to inquire about what transpired prior to the suspect being taken into custody. However, they did not hear back. Regarding Susan's cause of death, whether her body could be located, or the new evidence that led to Raymond Lewis's indictment, none of this information was made public. In a press release, Modesto police praised the California Department of Justice, the Stanislaus County District Attorney's Office, and multiple Texas authorities for their support during the difficult and lengthy investigation. It said that the resolution of Susan Robin Bender's case was made possible by these agencies working together. Almost immediately after they began to suspect foul play, detectives had a suspect. Lewis was arrested 1 month after Susan vanished on suspicion of committing a different burglary, according to court records filed in Stanislaus County. At the time, authorities used a green van to find Lewis. His name had not been released to the public at that point. They found out throughout their inquiry that Susan's mother, Patricia Bender, had had a brief collaboration with Raymond Stafford Lewis. At the time, Patricia claimed she suspected that after contacting their home phone, Lewis might have grown close to her daughter. Patricia briefly worked for Stafford Lewis at a security company in 1985, according to court documents. They also mentioned that she had dated Lewis a few times. Susan was familiar with Lewis. At the bus stop, Susan had been seen getting into his rented van. She allegedly stepped into his van without hesitation, according to her acquaintance who was at the bus stop the day she disappeared. In the 1980s, Raymond Stafford allegedly confessed to killing a woman by strangling her with a wire or cable and burying her close to the Big Oak Flat Yosemite entrance, according to a former resident of Stafford's home. He said that he drove to a campground near the Big Oak Flat entrance to Yosemite National Park and excavated the grave, according to court records that were retrieved. The 38-year-old Raymond Stafford filed to run for Modesto City Council in the months after Susan vanished. In July 1985, he told the local newspaper that his criminal past was just the result of being in the wrong place at the wrong time when they asked about it. According to his arrest documents, he was operating an unregistered private investigation business while donning a badge designating him as a private investigator. Stafford stated that the primary goal of his campaign was to pass legislation protecting children from predators. "We don't waste any time pursuing those who are bothering our kids," he said. Unsurprisingly, he failed to win an election. 5 months later, in December 1986, Stafford was found guilty of setting a company on fire after he acknowledged making a fraudulent police complaint. He allegedly staged a kidnapping in order to avoid appearing in court. In 1994, he came back on a law enforcement's radar. He was registered as an offender on the offender registry under the identity Greg Tunningly for the abuse of a 13-year-old girl in California. New court filings identified the individual as Stafford. Patricia Bender revealed that, after learning that the two had a covert relationship, she had always assumed Stafford was the cause of her daughter's disappearance. Patricia said, "I've known since the beginning when my daughter went missing. I've known all along that he was the one responsible. The investigators disregarded my statement to him." Patricia went on to claim that the idea had been a part of her for the preceding 37 years. She continued, "To be honest, I felt like I was lost. It was as if I were a wandering dead woman. It stings to hear other people talk about their kids and grandchildren. Patricia stated that the recollections of her 15-year-old daughter served as her source of inspiration. She thought about Susan's gregarious personality. She was a hilarious person. Patricia explained that she was simply a normal teenager trying to figure out who she was. Patricia Bender was tenacious, but her hunt for her daughter had been agonizing up until now. She spoke about needing to rely on her religion. She said, "I'm grateful. I'm relieved that the system has finally decided to do something and stop keeping me in the dark." Those closest to Susan hope to locate her in order to give her the send-off they have always felt she deserves. In the last act, her mother finally admits that she has never had trouble forgiving Stafford. "It may sound strange to say, but I have moved past his cruelty toward my kid. Since I don't want to bear that weight for the rest of my life, I really have." Patricia said this arrest has cleared a big cloud off her shoulders. "I'm not really excited about how the trial will go at this stage. All I want to do is find Susan's body." In her final statement, she stated, "My message is a simple one. Now pay attention to your kids." Moving on to the next case. Karen Moore. On June 26, 2001, the day before her birthday, 52-year-old Karen Moore, a Caucasian lady from Davie, Florida, left her house at 7 p.m., never to return. On the following day, Christina, her 8-year-old daughter, would return from summer camp in honor of her mother's birthday. But her mother would not be present to see her. Where could Karen have disappeared to? Was her disappearance connected to any illegal activity? When will she come back? Up until now, Christina had spent a long 22 years searching for the answers to these issues. Greetings and welcome back to Mystery Detective, the channel dedicated to narrating the stories of some of the most notorious unsolved cases in the United States and abroad. We are looking at a cold case that was unsolved for 22 years before being solved in 2023. Join us as we start to solve this mystery. Davie is a small suburban hamlet in Broward County, Florida, that combines the energy of Western-themed attractions with the coziness of a tight-knit community. The city's year-round sunshine, pleasant climate, and easy access to beaches are draws for both visitors and residents. Davie is well recognized for accommodating college students because it is the hub of multiple university campuses. Davie has a wealth of leisure activities, a top-notch school, and a welcoming community. Our case begins here in this lovely city today. Thomas Stewart Moore and Olga Charlotte Moore welcomed a daughter into the world on June 27, 1948. They christened her Karen Elizabeth Moore. Pam was the name of her sister as well. As a child, Karen enjoyed hiking, sailing, cooking, and playing the piano. Travel has always been Karen's passion, even as a small child. Before we continue, we want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch our videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy our content, consider subscribing. It's free. Now, let's move on with the video. It never occurred to anyone that she would go and never come back. She graduated in 1968 with an associate's degree in art, and in 1979 with a bachelor's degree in science with a nursing concentration. In 2001, 53-year-old Karen Elizabeth Moore and her spouse were going through a divorce. A restraining order was in place against him. Their 8-year-old daughter Christina was given full custody by Karen. Karen was employed as a nurse at the Boca Raton Retirement Community Edgeway Estates before to her abduction. She also never wavered in her resolve to providing Christina with a solid upbringing, even though she worked full-time. She sought to see that Christina enjoyed the best possible years. Christina also remembers Karen as a devoted mother. Karen made time for Christina despite her job as a nurse by taking her to the zoo and doing other things together. All she wanted was for her daughter to grow up happy and healthy. But this family's cheerful picture will soon give way to a depressing one that was full of unsolved mysteries. Karen was due to turn 53 on June 27th, 2001. Christina had come home from Girl Scout camp to celebrate with her mother, but Karen wasn't there to greet her. Christina realized something wasn't right when Karen didn't come pick her up. Given that Karen worked as a nurse, It made sense that she would be distracted. But Karen was always there for her daughter, and if she had to go to work, she would have sent someone else to pick Christina up. It was an unusual circumstance. As the day went on, the story that followed expanded by the hour. The last time anyone saw Karen was on June 26, 2001, at 6:30 p.m., when she hired her neighbor's son to mow her grass. She drove away from the house in her white 1999 Saturn at around 7 o'clock in the evening. No one knew where she might have gone or why she had gone outside. Karen's sister Pam, Kleiss, phoned the police after waiting for her for hours, and she still hadn't arrived at the residence. Pam claimed that she had requested her former husband to pick up Christina from camp the day Karen disappeared, before she departed for work. Before leaving the house, she later had a brief talk with the son of her neighbor. What transpired following these episodes is unknown. She had a job to report for the next day. Karen worked at Edge Point Estates, a retirement community, for 8 years, and her executive director, Keith Cradle, noted her dependable and responsible work history. Karen would have alerted the establishment if there had ever been an urgent duty because she was such a passionate worker. Everyone knew how much Christina meant to her, even herself. It was obvious that Karen had not left on her own initiative. Was there more at play here, or was this just a terrible accident? As suspicions grew, so did the police's limited resources in their search for Karen Moore. The first thing they needed to do was track her car. Karen disappeared inexplicably while operating a white 1999 Saturn 4-door with the license plate Doe. There was an Indiana State University sticker on the rear of her automobile. The public had access to all of this information's details. Detective James Franquiz of the Davie Police Department received a tip that a woman had soon reported seeing the identical car in South Miami-Dade County, but the story was unsubstantiated and unsupported by any other witnesses. In a desperate attempt to advance the investigation, the police released a missing poster detailing Karen's use. The posters featured her with brown hair, brown eyes, and glasses. Her height was given as 5 feet, 4 inches. In an attempt to locate Karen, the police were looking for leads, but they were not finding any. The initial survey of her house was enough to warn of terrible news. At home, her phone, suitcase, and whole clothing were found. Upon careful examination, there were no signs of forced entry or trespassing at her residence. Although the detective deduced that Karen had to have left the house willingly, the reason behind her departure remained a mystery. The public was notified by Detective James Francois that the police were looking into Karen Moo's phone and banking records. When there was no activity on her credit card or bank account, he instantly ruled out theft or robbery. This suggested that Karen was in a very bad place. She would have required money to sustain herself, as she still had all of her needs at home. Karen's family wanted the police to search for her using a helicopter, but they were unable to do so because they did not know the route Karen may take. Karen Moore had vanished from sight entirely. Days progressed into weeks into months, and months into years passed while Karen's family waited for a return. Despite the Moore family and the entire police department displaying missing person posters with consumers. Years and years went by, and Karen never returned. Her daughter, Christina, married and had children of her own, but Karen's whereabouts from that day remained a mystery. On January 6, 2023, Britton Lockhart, a scuba diver and the owner of the YouTube channel Depths of History, joined Mike Sullivan and Michael Rodriguez, who were leading the Sunshine State Sonar team in their investigation of the surrounding water bodies in Broward County. They used state-of-the-art sonar equipment to find an automobile in a Davie retention pond. When Michael's underwater sonar devices began to light up, the entire team understood they had hit automobile wheels in the water. Before discovering the automobile, they spent roughly 15 minutes looking for it. When Britton swam down to investigate, she found a license plate buried 3 feet below the surface of the muck in an exposed trunk. They were convinced they had found something important, but they didn't know exactly what it was or if it had anything to do with any previous incidents. Britton Lockhart immediately called the Davie Police Department. Even though Karen vanished inexplicably 22 years ago, The Davie police were still aware of her whereabouts. When they arrived at the location the next day, they had to send the divers back into the sea. After being pulled out of the water, the automobile was taken for further examination. The car that Karen was driving at the time of her disappearance fit the description. The license plate on Karen's car was found to be dusty. It was a noteworthy discovery in this 22-year-old instance. Pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together. Later on, it was established that Karen Moore had been inside the car when it crashed into the lake after 2 bones were found inside. It was finally revealed to them what had become to Karen Moore. Despite the fact that the entire search operation was broadcast live on YouTube, Lockhart and Rodriguez were not allowed to talk about the case's particulars. Due to suspicions of foul play, the search teams and the Moore family were not allowed to speak with the police about the case. Christina has finally found closure on the whats, hows, and whys of her mother's disappearance. Questions that have persisted for 22 years. Karen disappeared without explanation, leaving Christina in her family's care. She would never be able to duplicate the love and intimacy she felt with her mother. She had a lot of ups and downs in her early years. She even went into foster care for a while. During these moments, she would miss her mother and hope that she would be discovered or returned to her. Every young girl desires and hopes to have their mother by her side at every stage of life. My personal birthdays, the dates I got engaged, married, and had my 2 children. Christina stated in a sorrowful interview that they never got to know their grandmother. Christina had definitely had a close relationship with her mother. Even after all these years, in 2021, she made a post on TikTok complaining about how she wished she had spent a little more time with her mother. After 22 long years, Christina finally found out what had happened to her mother. Christina was thankful to the police and search teams for enabling her to bring Karen back home and give her a peaceful burial, even though she was unable to find all the answers to the issues that had plagued her for years. The case of Karen Moss's disappearance is still being looked investigated. Police and Davie emailed Fox News Digital to let them know that they had spoken with the detectives, but couldn't say further because they were worried it would jeopardize the investigation's prospects of being successful. Then came the next set of urgent questions when Karen's body was found in the pond. How did Karen end up falling into the pond? What was this crime's intended outcome? If the police's suspicions are true, then who was responsible for the 22 years of pain that Christina and the Moore family endured? Now that Karen has returned home after 22 years away, there is yet hope for her. There was some degree of success, thanks to Sonos Systems technology developments and the dedication of the police department. Though at this point the answers are unclear, Karen's justice may be just around the corner. Never be reluctant to share your knowledge. Your expertise might be essential to unlocking a long-standing enigma. Was it an accident that killed Karen, or was there a darker motive? Do you believe there is still hope for this case? Share your thoughts with us by posting them in the comments box. Thanks for watching.